Yes, and that's why it's so great. So great for me.
And begin scene.
What is it? I forget.
We gotta do this. We gotta do and marker.
Yours is better than mine. Yeah. Sorry.
Jess Everhart.
And yeah. Hi, friend.
How are you?
Good. I feel like before we do this, we have to get the zoomies out. Like kids, they have to like run around the house and get the zoomies out and just run. Is that what you call it? The zoomies?
How have I made it this far into COVID without hearing that term? Because it seems so appropriate.
Right. I mean, you got 4 kids who have the zoomies.
I do.
All the time.
100%. Oh, virtual school. That was exactly, you hit the diagnosis spot on. You gave language to my pain.
Well, that's what we're doing. So
there we go.
You're funny. I can see those who are watching us on YouTube sees Rob's face. It was a total revelation just now. It was like, how did I not know that?
No, yeah. This was an authentic, surprising. I receive this term and I'm going to begin using it immediately.
There you go. Well,
for our podcast listeners, that just was like totally irrelevant. This is audio only. They don't get a version of that, but for our video people, they know what's up.
That's right. We were shaking out our shoulders and being silly right before we went live. So anyways, friends.
Give us, all right, expand on well. That's 4 letters.
Yes,
you always give
the
people more than that. Come on,
I'm doing well. I guess the big highlight since last week, when we recorded last week, I was getting ready to head out of town and go to St. Louis. And I did that and spoke at the Missouri Chamber of Commerce Women in Leadership Conference. So women from all over the state of Missouri were there, and I got to address them at lunch. It was lovely. They were lovely. It was so nice to come back to the Midwest. You know, I'm from Ohio. Well, raised in Ohio. And so being in the Midwest, man, the Midwest folks, they're nice. Not that Durham and North Carolinians aren't nice.
It's okay. You don't have to qualify us. You can just make a statement. I'm not offended.
But man, listen, Midwesterners got that special kind of juice, just that extra special love. I forgot just quick story. I forgot my charger. Forgot every single charger.
As one does.
Yes. Flying to the middle of the country. I left every charger imaginable, my laptop, my phone,
all of them.
The whole thing. All of them. Yep. And so I got into Uber because I have no transportation. I'm in the middle of a city I've never been to. And I go to Walmart and I have one little charger. So as I said, which one? Pick a charger. I picked the phone charger as the most important. I grabbed my phone charger and I'm in line. And the guy in front of me was like, would you like to go in front of us, ma'am? You only have one thing. And I was like, no, it's fine. It's fine. He's like, no, please. No, he felt uncomfortable that I would not take the offer. So I went in front of him. The guy in front of him was like, ma'am, just go ahead. You can go in front of me. I was like, I looked around and was like, am I getting punked? What is happening in this store?
Yeah. You're like, when's the floor going to fall out?
People were so kind. Yeah. And they basically fast tracked me to the front of the line for no real good reason other than I had one thing. And I must have looked like I was from out of town. And so they all just were really lovely. The Uber drivers were incredibly nice, gave me great things to see and places to go. Unsolicited. I mean, come on, St. Louis. That's all I got to say about that.
Just giving
St. Louis
a shout
gets
out.
A bad rap, man.
You're trying to grow our listener base in Missouri.
I am. That's what it is.
Love.
It is.
Their Walmart is awesome. Their Ubers are
Uber
great.
drivers are awesome. I stayed at the Renaissance. Shout out to the Renaissance Airport. The people there were incredible. Look, listen. And the folks at the Missouri Chamber. Spot on. It was great. So that's my update. I'm renewed faith in humanity. How was your that's my check-in. How's your check-in?
I hope we keep that going. That's great.
I set the bar high, friend. My faith in humanity.
You did. How do I follow? I have restored faith in humanity. I don't know. That feels like I don't know. That's a lot. I'm just gonna give what I already prepared to share because I feel like I just can't. I can't pivot to meet that moment. I've been to Missouri. I love it. It's beautiful there. They have that whole idea of mountains and lakes together, which is like kind of amazing. I don't know. Anyway. Hey,
is that Minnesota? I think that's Minnesota, isn't it? Not to correct you. Is it Missouri?
Missouri has
I
lakes
don't know that.
with mountain backdrops. Come on.
I actually have no idea. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I'm going to send you pictures after this.
People in Minnesota.
Around Branson, Missouri.
Branson, Missouri. Okay.
They've got some stuff.
I trust you. Keep going.
You do, but also in a very real way you don't because you just
I don't know because I actually have no idea.
You're thinking of a whole other state. Okay.
Yes, go back.
speaking of our national heritage, there we go. If I just delayed you long enough, I was going to get there. Speaking of our national heritage, I got a couple callbacks from previous episodes. First, Mark Charles from last week.
Yeah.
He encourage us to start with looking up the land that our homes sit on.
Yes.
And who they go back to, as far as go native-land.ca for those of you who guys remember. If not, that's a website I encourage you. It took literally 60 seconds. I typed in my address, and it was really a powerful experience. I mean, I'm still reflecting on it, but to see actually 3 tribes pulled up, the Lumbee, the Tuscarora, and the Occaneechi. And those are the tribes that who were the original occupants of the land of which my home currently sits in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so I think that was reading that book ahead of Thanksgiving has been really good for me, reflecting on just the power of place and the history of the places that we occupy has been really good for me, as well as I kind of enter into this holiday season. And that interview was really powerful. So anyone who is listening to this and haven't done that one is a great primer for this one. So I would say encourage you to press pause, come back to this one, but go back and listen to Mark Charles because that was a really powerful conversation. And then I'm going to try and practice some rest ahead of the holidays as well. We had shout out to Steve Swain of the St. Francis Center. I know you ran a great commercial for Greensboro as well as Missouri. So I'm going to go next week. I'm going to go and get a little bit of a personal retreat there. Steve graciously opened up a spot for me to go last minute and spend the night. So I'm really looking forward to that and kind of get some rejuvenation heading into the holidays. So
enjoy that, friend. You're going to enjoy it. I'm glad to hear that. That's really good. So
speaking of holiday preparation, this is the perfect guest. This is the perfect guest for the perfect moment. And she's going to be mad at me because I'm going to hype her up. And I don't know if she wants me to do that, but I can't. I wouldn't be a good podcast host if I was just getting people sort of pumped. I really gotta, I want to raise
the temperature. Thing. That's right. Yeah,
come on.
Be the hype man.
They've never disappointed us before, right?
Sure.
That makes it even more pressure, right? That's
again,
like the worst thing I could have
you got to see Janelle's face. She's
going to slowly slide off the screen.
What did I agree to do? Yeah.
Ghost us right now. But Janelle Aldred, are you welcome onto the Just Podcast?
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are thrilled to have you.
Please do.
I'm going to stop there because I know you want me to stop there. But we're thrilled to have you. This is a conversation we've been looking forward to for a while. And there's so much that we get to discuss with you today, and you get to kind of take our listeners on a journey. So we're just going to start rolling up our sleeves and get after this so that if people can't hear, she is calling in from across the pond. So the hours are a little wonky. I don't even know if you practice daylight savings time or if that's a really dumb question, but
we do. We had it last weekend.
So I don't even know what that does.
So did we.
You are operating a way different time zone. So we're going to try and respect your time because it's afternoon our time, evening yours, right? And we want to let you get to bed at a decent hour. But we're excited that you would join the Just Podcast. And one of the beautiful blessings of doing it in this format is that we get to connect with people around the world that we would never otherwise be able to hang out with in Durham, North Carolina, which, man, what a blessing. So much global thought leadership, Jess.
Pretty powerful,
right?
It's pretty powerful. Look at us.
So I'm gonna stop just raving, and I'm just gonna read from the bio. I'm gonna go more formal for a second, and then we're just gonna jump in. So for those of you who have not yet heard, I can do this. There we go. The book. We're both gonna hold up our copy of Communicate for Change, Janelle's recently newly published book, which has been called A Huge Step Forward and a Fresh Perspective for Justice Conversations. We've been talking about justice for 50 plus episodes, Jeff. Now we're going to talk about how you talk about justice, which is something we've never done and we talked about needing to do. And this is, I think, the perfect time to have this conversation. So Janelle has a broadcaster and journalist background. She's worked for the BBC in that space. So she kind of really brings a journalistic lens to this, which I think is really neat, especially for us as a storytelling podcast. I think that just really resonates with us. The power of narrative, the power of story, and how that drives these conversations forward or hinders them, really. And she really hones in on ethical storytelling and the role of communication specifically in creating a more just world. She's also an ambassador for SANDS, SANDS, which is the Stillborn and Neonatal Death Society, and regularly contributes to societal conversations on TV, radio, and print, and now podcasting. Can you update your bio now? Because surely we're not the first podcast. And she holds an MA in broadcast journalism. So Janelle, we are thrilled and we're honored to have you onto the show. I'd love our listeners just to hear more of your story. That's kind of our classic starter question, is just give us a little bit of how you got to do the work that you're doing now, and specifically what motivated you to put pen to paper and write this book.
So it's really interesting. I think it's so funny how all of life is interconnected. You know, when you go back and connect the dots, a lot of things that you do now make sense, which at the time made no sense at all. I grew up in church, Pentecostal church. My dad's a minister. And I think my first love of understanding the power of communication was, and I talk about it in the book a bit, sitting outside my dad's office. And then there were no mobile phones, so any phone call was stationary. And I would sit outside my dad's office and I would listen to all of his phone calls, which obviously I was not meant to be doing. But, you know, if you've been part of any religious setup, you all know how political they are. So a lot of what's going on is the maneuvering of people to make something happen. So I would hear my dad like on the phone with this person. Oops, sorry, I just dropped my phone. So I would sit outside my dad's office and listen to him on the phone with this person, moving them a bit, get on the phone with the other person, move them a bit, get on the phone back with the first person, move them a bit. And I think I was just fascinated by the ability to do things. And I think, well, I believe he was doing it all for good, but to see how people could actually move people along from A to B. And, you know, just through life, going to church, going to school, very chatty. We were raised really confident, really opinionated, perhaps a little precocious. And then I think eventually I ended up, and the reason why I'm an ambassador for SANS is when I was 19, I actually lost a baby. I went full term pregnant and I had a stillbirth at 40 weeks and 10 days. And that experience really obviously changed the trajectory of my life, but also it put a real thing in me for justice because I wasn't listened to. And so that's why that whole situation occurred. And so eventually I end up then in journalism, which is all about truth seeking, telling stories, listening to voices. So when you kind of connect the dots, this is something that kind of makes sense in the context of everywhere I've been and everything that I've done. And in the end, the reason why I didn't carry on doing journalism, I've still got a big love for journalism and a big love for news, but I wasn't sure, are we informing people? Are we scaring people? What are we really putting out into the world? And so I decided to go into the dark art of comms. Don't ask me how that makes any better, but then I did the dark art of comms. So I'm a comms director now for a gender diversity consultancy. But the thing why I ended up writing the book was because it was around the time when Meghan married Prince Harry. So after the wedding, there were all these headlines in the UK about Meghan, and they were contrasting them to the headlines around Kate and how different they were comparing them. And the conversation was going, these headlines are racist. And other people saying these headlines are not racist. And the argument was very much falling on two sides with no nuance in the middle. And I was looking at this conversation and thought, how many conversations do we see going like this? Absolutely no nuance, no grey area. You have to pick a side. You have to defend everything that goes on in that side. And I was just starting to think there's got to be a better way that we can approach these conversations that actually go from moving people from A to B, like I'd seen when I was a child. And I thought, as I've seen as a journalist, as I've seen the power the media holds, there's got to be a better way for us to do this.
So good. Thank you. Yes. So listen, Janelle, you're speaking our language here. I love that you brought up Harry and Meghan, because even though that's like a pop culture moment, it is a perfect example of how, like, we can, all over the globe, we could bring this up and people can understand what you're saying about that polarization. And you lay that pop culture example that we kind of do have sides on. I have a side, and lay it on top of the more, let's be honest, critical and important issues of the day around justice. And you can see how people will say, no, there's flag in the ground, right? And you even say, you know, it's important to win the hearts, you know, it's about winning hearts and minds. And how do you do that? And I love this book. I think Rob has read it twice. Is that true, Rob? I have not read it twice. I have read it a good about 75% through, but it's so good. It's really, really good. Go ahead, Rob. Have you read it twice?
No, not yet, but now you make me feel bad because I thoroughly enjoyed it the first time around. It's well highlighted. Highlight? How do you say? Highlight?
That's right. It's highlight. So this next question is kind of like a 30,000 foot question, and it sort of addresses, we're going to get deeper into these circular conversations that you like to talk about. But, 2020 was a big deal. It's a big moment in our history, and history has had big moments. So, there's always big moments. We've had ours in our lifetime, with the murder of George Floyd, with COVID right on the heels. It's a lot happening, and we're all trying to make sense of it. It is a current cultural moment. And, this book is all about conversation. So what is it for you that makes this moment so challenging to talk about issues of injustice? I think you've touched a little bit about this polarization, but what is it about this moment in time that has made it so difficult? And what's unique about what happened in 2020? How does that come forward? How do you see that playing a role?
I think it's interesting. We almost came and had a perfect storm. So on one, we have a big, massively increasing culture of individualization. So the way I see the world is the way the world is. So because I feel, therefore it's true. So people tell you, you made me feel like this. Now, whilst there's truth in that, it's not our truth. Well, it's our truth. It's not the truth, should I say. So, and I know people talk a lot, and I talk a lot in the book, and I've written about it in an article. People say that great Maya Angelou quote, no one will forget the way you made them feel. And there's truth in that. But the other truth to that is you cannot also be responsible for how someone else enters a space emotionally when you have a conversation. So when me and you get into a conversation, I could say something perfectly nice and benign. If you don't feel good about yourself, about the thing I'm talking about something else to do with that, or it's just a sore spot for you in general, you might go away from that conversation feeling really badly. Maybe I did everything right. Maybe I did everything wrong. So I think there's a lot of emphasis on feelings in the world at the moment. So that's one thing that I think has probably gotten a bit out of kilter, because it is important, but I think it's gone way one way. So people think feelings are facts. So we have this one truth going on. In the midst of that, let's throw a global pandemic in the mix, where people have never in our lifetime, in my lifetime, been shut in. In our lifetimes, we have not lived through a war where we had to be in our homes, in the Western context I'm talking about. So all of a sudden, you've got people who have access to the whole world but can't leave their house. So whatever's going on our TVs and in our mobile phones becomes the world. So we have this individualization feeling thing, we have this locked in thing, and then in this we have brutal murder on video. Now, normally, we've seen these videos before. Sadly, it's not the first time. But the difference between other times and this time is we're not at home. So you watch something on the news, oh my God, that's awful. You leave your house, you go on with your day, you go to work, you see your friends, you go to dinner, you see it again on the news the next day, you talk about it, but life is kind of moving. But with the pandemic, life was at a standstill. So we didn't have a single choice apart from to look at whatever was being presented to us in a mass way. And I think that happening is what made the George Floyd moment a lot more impactful. I think the video itself, as a journalist, I often think about the narratives of videos. In other videos, we'd often seen a struggle or something happening before. In this video, we enter it at the point where he's already on the ground and subdued and with someone's knee on his neck. There's all of these things going on. And then if we add to that the individualization that people often do when they see something like this, and in the way that the world now feelings are facts, I think that enabled this to kind of mushroom into something much more. And it's not saying that it shouldn't have mushroomed, but I'm saying I think this is why this particular case became more prominent than others.
And I just have a quick follow-up on that. So do you feel like, because I thought, that the country was galvanized in a moment. It's like when 9/11, and I might be naive here, but 9/11 happened, we all galvanized, and then it sort of like decided to sort of, it dematerialized, right? Deconstructed, and people took sides again. But not really. I mean, we all understand that was an act of terror. And so right. But I mean, I'm trying to stop talking about it from like more of a patriotic side and like who did what and all that. where's the blame placed? But in this case, it felt like it was galvanized and then it quickly polarized. And I don't know if that's how you experienced it too. It's so interesting to talk to somebody who has a lens into our country. But that's how it felt for me. Because like for a moment, it felt like we were all singing from the same sheet of music. Like, this is injustice. This is what we're saying. This is, people saw, the Black community maybe in a new way. And it felt like, oh my gosh, we're being seen. And then it was like two sides of the ring again. And I wonder how you experienced that.
Because it's down to the individualization. So people then felt, again, the feelings attacked.
Yeah.
So then you get people saying, oh, well, does Black Lives Matter mean that you're saying this? So then all of a sudden we're back into the individualization, we're back into the feelings, and the feelings are not the facts about the justice or the injustice that we saw happen. And I think that the thing that I think is a lot of times we want people to behave in the right way, but people are people and they behave like they behave. And so often we try to deal with people as we feel they should be behaving or as we feel they should be reacting. And what that does is it creates more miscommunication, because you will never talk to someone who sees the world like you, an impossibility. But we try to change people's minds, see it my way, as if they could ever walk a day in your shoes, and they can't. And so I think that's where a lot more misunderstanding comes in.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like we've mentioned this before on the podcast, Jess, with that Netflix documentary, kind of explaining the algorithm of social media, where people are starting to talk about more about how they're the product, right? And like, let's understand the system in which you're a part of. I feel like Janelle just did that for us when it comes to the systems of communication, because we've talked about this incident in 2020. We were walking through this the entire time, recording interviews, talking to people, processing that personally. But I think you basically have just explained kind of this, almost like a lattice, the way, the structure in which a plant grows, and these plants being individuals, in ways that really helps give words to what we're all a part of and contributing to, kind of for good or for evil, or the gray in between, which I think your book leans into. So Jess started out 20,000 feet. 30,000. I may have taken us down 10,000 in my recall there, but let's take it down to the individual. Let's talk more about the individual, because I think we have individual listeners, part of our podcast. I love how you open your book in the preface. I mean, this thing just comes in hot. Not even in chapter 1 yet, because sometimes I skip the preface of a book. So I'm like, is it worth it? So glad I didn't do this for this one, Jess. You use an example from the Bible. You talk about how your faith drives a lot of what you bring to the table and the lens in which you see these things. Talking specifically about the incident in the New Testament, Jesus and the woman caught in adultery, and how Jesus avoided telling people to change in that scene, but instead he asked them to look inside. And as a result of him doing that, the people who were about to kill her drop their stones and literally walk away, saving her life. And so the quote from the book is, you say, the journey towards a better society starts with honestly regarding ourselves. It's easy to think the problems are external, but we can and must seek out the propensity for injustice that lurks inside us and work towards eradicating it. As we try to tell others what to do, you ask this question that I think is really profound. How much honesty is missing from our communication about our own part in maintaining an unjust world? So that was as refreshing as it was startling to read, especially in the beginning, because I feel like we're all been conditioned in this cancel culture. Yeah. And in your analogy, to borrow the term, stone throwing culture, right? Where everybody else is the problem. And honestly, you seem to be modeling this parable in the way that you write this book and the posture in which you approach the listener that is pretty disarming. And it kind of, because you model lowering your stones and inviting the reader, or at least that's how I felt. You're inviting me to do the same thing and to follow your example. So my question is, I just love to hear, that's so refreshing. What led you to take that approach? Because it really resonated with me on a deep level. And I think probably for a lot of the folks who pick up your book as well.
Well, let me tell you, I've had to really reconsider the things I tweet since I've written this book, because I'm like, am I holding myself up to my own high standards? But I think the interesting thing is, I remember asking my mom, so my parents have been married for forever. And I said to my mom, what makes you stay? Not that anything bad's going on, but I was just curious, like, what makes a relationship work? How do you trust someone? And my mom said to me, do you know what? A lot of it is about trusting yourself. If you can't trust yourself, you can't trust someone else. And I just found that really, really interesting. And I think there's a lot of projecting that goes on in this world, which is very natural and very, very normal. But actually, the thing about it is how can we all consider what are we bringing to the conversation? How are we approaching it? Are we approaching it in the spirit we would like the other person to approach it? Because often the answer is no. Because when we feel that we're right, there's a kind of self-righteousness that can creep in feeling right to tell someone else they're definitely wrong. And most of the time when we're having these conversations, we're dealing with the unseen. You know, we look at someone and I see, okay, well, you know, and excuse my phraseology if I get it wrong for the way people understand it, but I say, okay, I see a white man, I see a black woman. That beneath that, there is so much more going on beneath the surface. And when we talk to people, that's what we're touching. That's what we're troubling. And sometimes it's worth it to consider that's what's going on. If at the top of this conversation, I didn't say that I'd lost a child, how could you know that? How could you know that certain things would upset me or I would find certain things triggering or hard? And so people almost go into conversations almost assuming that other people will see their unseen whilst not seeing their unseen, if that makes sense. They look at the other person and they see what they can see, but they want the other person to talk to them as if they can know all the things that make them who they are. And you notice it more and more. And the more right people think they are, is the more righteous they become. And often the more alienating they actually become to the other side. And I really, when the first draft of the book was so gentle, I was like, no one's going to get it. I was like, I'm being so gentle that I don't think it's going to. And then it was quite tough. And I was like, okay, this is a bit tough. You know, I described it as maybe it's a bit of a slap around the face than a hug. But really, because I didn't want to beat people up for a whole book. But equally, I want us to get better at this. I want us to be better. But much of it starts with self-examination. But really, most social justice conversations start with the other examination rather than ourselves. And if we really understood what makes us tick, how we work, then we can begin to understand how other people work. But that is a very conscious effort and a conscious choice. But I think we just don't even think about communication when we think about social justice. We tell people things. We argue with people. We beat them up. We tell them they need to go and educate themselves. They need to go and pick up. We tell them all the things they need to do. And I often think if you're in a relationship with someone and you treat them that way, it wouldn't last. But we don't take the principles that we know to work on a one-to-one level and macro them out so that they go big picture. In fact, we do the very opposite things that we would never do in a relationship. If you had a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife or whatever, and you're always telling them, you just need to pick up a book about this because you've upset me today. You don't know enough about women. You need to pick up a book about women. This is not going to go well. You would explain to them, hopefully, if it's healthy, you will tell them, this is what upsets me. This is why. These are all the things that make this a problem. I really hope that you can understand. Tell me, how do you see it? To actually get a good conversation going, but we don't apply that to the big scale.
Oof, that was good. That was good. Macroing out our one-on-one interactions with people, taking it to a macro level and taking notes. I didn't have my pen handy to grab my pen to make all these notes. I also loved
all is lost. You didn't pick up a pen in the Walmart in Missouri.
That's exactly right. Let me fly to St. Louis so we can take care of it. This is great to know. I also love, thank you for really providing a very personal example, right, of your child. And I was thinking, that's right, when we have to be so careful, and I'm so guilty of this, because I do, I assume when people are talking to me that they kind of see a thing, and I'm like, they don't know. They don't know who I am. If I told them 3 things, I'd probably blow them out. It would blow their mind if I told them this, this, and this, right? So they don't know who I am in real life. They're assuming this. But who am I to say that? Because I do the same thing to people. I do the same thing. And the only way you can cross that bridge is to take the time to apply these one-on-one principles of relationship building, not say, go read a book on Jess, because there isn't one. There isn't a book on Jess. Well, they're not really. There's a book on chess.
Not yet.
No, not yet. So you have to ask me, right? We have to be in relationship in order for you to get to the nuance of who we are as humans, and how do you blow that up to a macro level? That's really, it is simple. We say this, I haven't said this in a while, Rob, but this is a good point for it. Simple, but not simplistic, right? That concept is simple, but not simplistic. So early on in the book, you kind of tell us, you say for long-term change, you talk about this long-lasting change. The way to do that is to win hearts and minds, right? We got to put hearts and minds together. That whole thing needs to be blended. You can't attack one, not the other, or focus on one and not the other. And that's really the goal of communication. You even, I think, reference Zig Ziglar and all that. And we love him around here. So that was really good to like bring it home. Like that's basic communication. Go ahead, Rob. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, around here, when you're talking to an international guest, are you talking about all of America?
I am. I'm talking about US of A.
All right. That's cool. I just wanted to clarify for the listeners, if we're making just crazy broad generalizations.
Not just Durham. Zig Ziglar is known around this US of A.
That's all. I didn't have anything insightful.
Thank you. That was helpful. Clearly in the world, because over in the UK, she's quoting him. But okay. But winning the hearts and minds. Okay. That's good. That's the goal for good communication. And you say that we should apply that to social justice issues. So help me understand, like, what's that pairing? Why are those two important, and why can't you just do one without the other?
Sometimes people go after the heart, and sometimes they do it emotionally, sometimes emotionally manipulatively, to get someone to do something. And if you make someone feel guilt or shame and tug at their heartstrings, they might change for a while, but when they forget the feeling, they'll forget the change. Growing up in church, you often see people who would come to the altar like every other week and like give their life to Jesus, and it's emotional and they're crying and it's the whole, I'm just going to change. And then 2 weeks later, like we see the same thing. And I'm not saying it's not a daily recommitment, but what I'm saying is it was an emotional thing tied up in the emotion of the moment. And when the emotion dies down, so does the decision. Things change, they change, then they come back to the thing, and then we do this whole guilt and shame cycle thing, which is a very emotional high and then low lows. So I don't think just winning hearts can ever provide long-lasting change. And I think when we saw the George Floyd thing, kind of, you alluded to it earlier, Jess, we saw a lot of hearts engaging. And then once the heart disengaged because the heart gets pulled to another thing, then people started moving into individualization because the mind didn't click. It didn't change. But if we only just change minds and not hearts, then it becomes a very transactional rule. I'll do this, and then there'll be justice. But there's kind of no feeling behind it. And so it will be very transactional. People on the other side often will not feel valued, listened to, because actually it's just a very mind rule based, do this, don't do that, say this, don't say that, and also without any understanding about why you're doing what you're doing. And ultimately, again, that does not create long lasting change. Like I'm not a big rule follower. If a rule makes sense to me, then I will follow it. If a rule does not make sense to me, I'll also be like, that rule doesn't make sense to me. I'm not going to do that. So I think it's about understanding that you have to kind of click the two together, because when your mind is changed with feeling and emotion and understanding, there's something about that you carry that with you in a very powerful way for a much, much, much longer time, till it becomes who you are and how you do things. It's like I'm like a gym person. Well, I used to be before lockdown. So I used to go to the gym 5 days a week. And it's because one day I saw a photo of myself and I was like, no, I don't think so. So, I started going to the gym and I made this really powerful change, because my mind and my heart just felt like I don't want to be like this. I want to be fit. I want to be healthy. But now I have very much a mind kind of thing, like I need to get healthy, but my heart's not in it. So I've really struggled to implement those changes and to make them stick. I'll do it every now and again, but not consistently. So I think when we pull the two together, it does just create something much more powerful and meaningful, something that can last and go deep down in you and high up in your head and like take you much further. But I think a lot of times we go after heart when it comes to people, and when it comes to places like work, we go after head. And both of them don't make the change.
Yeah, that's great. Well said. I got that. I get that, and I see it. That clicks for me.
Work, we do quotas.
Yeah, it might.
Sorry, work, we do quotas, and we say, right, we need to get people, but people don't understand why, so they kick, and we don't do it. But when it comes to people, we say, hey, Rob, you made me feel bad. You should do better. We do the heart thing, and so how can we get both together?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of that book, Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. Just this concept, the metaphor of the elephant and the rider. And they're saying, how do you actually get they're hitting on the same point or similar point of like mind and heart change. The elephant represents the emotion, and then the rider is the logic. And you got to get those things aligned, because if you have a rider that wants to go in a different direction of the elephant, good luck. Because, you might be able to get it to make a slight turn, but it's going to be exhausting. Let's get them aligned so that you can actually go far over a long period of time.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to have you unpack a term that was definitely new to me. I'm sure it'll be new to some in our audience. You use the term activist savior. So I've heard of both of those terms separately, but never together. And I'm really looking forward to hearing you just say more, because I kind of felt as I was reading you unpack it, I was fascinated, but also honestly, personally pretty convicted. Safe to say there's probably some folks that would also maybe be convicted by that section of the book when they pick it up. So can you just kind of define that term for our listeners, and also share how can someone tell if they fit that category?
I think I kind of came to it. I think social media has made this more of a thing, this activist savior thing as well. I think that is something that fosters a perfect space for it. But I worked in international development, and you see a lot of it going on. I always find it quite interesting that people feel very called to a whole different continent, and yet the person in poverty at the end of their street doesn't seem to be able to get a look in. We only love our neighbour if they're far away and out of sight most of the time. They're very easy to love and care for and give to, but actually the people who we see in our spaces, we find that harder. So I think for me, you see it a lot on social media, and people with these Instagram accounts, and they're kind of, we're allies, and here I am lending my voice to this cause, because gosh, what if you weren't lending it, nothing would change. And I think that's how you can tell when you kind of move into savior mode, where you just say, here I am, one person just amplifying the cause. And you see it all the time. And don't get me wrong, a lot of this is well intentioned. It's not malice, it's not bad people, but it's people very much centering themselves as the solution to people's problems when they know nothing really about the depth and complexity of the actual problem. If you say, as people say, I want to be an ally to Black women, which kind of Black women do you speak of? Are you speaking of Black women who are economically disadvantaged? Are you talking about Black women who are actually not economically disadvantaged, professionals in the workplace, getting on with things, doing stuff? Are you talking about Black mothers? Are you talking about Black women from African Americans? Are you talking about Black women from the diaspora in the Caribbean what are you talking about? Most people don't know. You could scratch under that little surface, there's nothing there. They don't actually know much about the group that they say that they're allying themselves with. And so I think when we notice ourselves getting into that space where we're passionately advocating for things we don't actually know much about, thinking that, gosh, if we weren't to lend our voice, what would happen? I think we have to recognize we have a bit of a savior complex going on. And to be honest as well, this is not just like a white thing. I think we'd be remiss to kind of say that, because it happens all the time. I've been challenging myself recently about my own circle of friends, because I will be someone who says, as I do say, I care about people who are economically disadvantaged. I want things to be better, especially for people of colour, for Black people, but if I look around my circle of friends, where are those people? They're not in my circle of friends. So I have to really question myself about what is my role, that I would go out on Instagram and put a post about it, but in my day-to-day life, there's nothing there. But I would say that I should speak on it. I should speak on it as someone who is not economically, I should say something. And I think I just have to question, what is my activism really resulting in? And where do I feel I'm some kind of savior who can help people who I know nothing about, heart really probably not engaged in the way it should be. And I have to challenge my own self on things like that.
Yeah, that's challenging. And I'm glad we do a little thing at the end. That's something that probably will come back to us here in just a minute. As for our listeners, something for them to tackle. It's a wonderful challenge that you put out there for me, for Rob, for our listeners. Let's talk about challenges. Let's talk about, we're about 3 days out. If our listeners are listening to us on routine here, they are checking in on this on the Monday before Thanksgiving. So we're about 3 days away from our, holiday here. And we know that it can be a highly charged event, right? This is when folks who normally aren't together, are coming together to celebrate, see each other's little family reunion at times, grandpa and uncle who we haven't seen all year are now at the table, and they may share different points of view. And so it can be a highly charged moment. It also can be a great moment of opportunity to open the door for conversation. And in your book, and you talked about this, I mean, you've been weaving this thread this entire interview, but in your book, you specifically write that we often enter a conversation, and I'm doing air quotes here, knowing that those on the other side of it are wrong, right? And that our ears and hearts are closed. And if we're not prepared to listen to other points of view, perhaps it's best not to enter social justice discourses. We can never help someone to understand what we mean and believe if we don't listen to what they mean and believe. I mean, it's just nailing this point, driving it home again. So for our listeners, what advice? This is interesting because you say maybe don't talk about it. That's unusual advice, is to say step back. But talk to us about the advice that you might give as our folks are entering this season, entering these familiar but not often, this new table once a year, right? We're coming to a new table again with lots happening in the last year. How do they handle that conversation? Do you want to give them any advice?
I think the thing to remember is sometimes we can make people's hearts so hard by our approach because we enter with no softness, we enter with no humility. People don't just arrive, we're not in vacuums. We are the water we swim in. We're the societies we live in. We're the culture. We're the times. We're the media we consume. We're the books we read. We're the people we know. And we offer ourselves all of this complexity. And we often don't offer someone else that complexity because we say they're racist, they're misogynistic, they're this, whatever, insert the word. And so we offer them no grace. We offer them no listening ears. Because as far as we're concerned, we are reasonable and on the side of the angels, and everyone's always on the side of the angels, and they are unreasonable. But guess what? They think they're on the side of the angels, and they think you are not on the side of the angels. And so it's about understanding that you're both coming into this conversation convinced of rightness. But I think sometimes we so want to be right that we don't even contemplate that we could be wrong about any of it. And it's like the Meghan thing. Those headlines, there's probably a bit of truth in all of it. Some of it might not have been racist, just mean. Some of it will have been racist. And there's a lot of it that's swimming around in the middle. And so for that family member that says one thing and you categorize them as a thing, it's worth considering. How would you feel if you were categorized as a whole word based on a few lines of a conversation? You would feel misunderstood. You would feel misjudged. That's not what I mean. There's so much more to the way that I feel and And so I think it's about entering these conversations, giving the other person that grace to understand, okay, well, let me listen and let me ask questions. Because I think the one thing we often don't do is don't ask questions. So why do you feel that way? What do you mean by that? And allow someone else to go through their own process by asking them questions to examine what they're saying. People often say things like, I can't just give the job to someone because they're black or a woman, or, and sometimes I say, well, are you saying that there's not a single woman or black person in the billions of people on the planet that's qualified to do this job? No. Okay. So if we start from there, now we can have a conversation about what do you mean when you say that? Because actually what a lot of people mean is I am losing an opportunity here. That makes me afraid. I don't want to lose my opportunities. I have hopes and dreams too. And now I feel like I'm going to be passed over. Whether that's right or wrong, that's how someone is feeling. So we don't address how they should feel, address how they are. When you say to someone, you're racist, will not get defensive? You're misogynistic. Who will not get defensive? People are going to become defensive. So I think it's about saying, and as I said to someone the other day, a good friend of mine on Twitter, he is so right wing. And he said something the other day, and I was like, that is so offensive. So I messaged him and I was like, come on. I was like, that is really offensive. And, you know, we had a bit of a conversation about it. But I just said to him, look, I don't think that you are like this, but I can tell you that this reads exactly like that. And I want to understand, like, why would you think that's okay to say? And then we just had a conversation. But I think often we go in hard, we go in strong because we want someone to be right as we see rightness. And I think it's just about understanding that, yes, there are some awful things. I'm not denying racism, sexism, all those things exist and are horrible. And we wish they weren't in the world. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is judge as you would like to be judged. If you think one line does not define you, one line does not define someone else. And so I think it's just about always, always, always bringing that grace, bringing that humility, dropping the need to be right to come to a solution. And I think if there's one thing in the book that I'm hoping that I get to is saying, let's just drop the moral argument for a moment and let's just talk about human behavior and how fearful most people become very, very quickly. And let's meet someone there. Mm-hmm. So that we can get to a solution and not find our egos bigger than finding the solution.
Yeah.
Mm. Wow. Well, I feel better about going to Thanksgiving now. Jess, are you good? Like,
I'm good.
This is
my tables to be real small. It's like me, my mom, and my son. So I'm straight either way. Actually,
you're fine. And I think mine is not that I have. Mine's more so I just need to not speak because I'm probably I need a lot of heart change, right? I need to repent before I open my mouth. And just like we say the introduction of this podcast, right? We're here to listen. We're here to process. And I know this conversation is going to help me take more of the right posture. I don't know if anyone can ever take the perfect posture, but lowering the stones, right, in our hands. And Janelle, we've already asked you to give a piece of advice. And so, you know, instead of asking you the same question twice, I'll just open up the floor. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with? A comment, a question you'd ask them to ask themselves, but just in the spirit of anything we haven't covered that you just loved as we land the plane?
I think the question, someone asked me, if I could change the world, what one thing would I do? And I said, and it's slightly off topic, I would give everyone great self-esteem. Because I actually think a lot of what enters these conversations is fear, is not a love of self. And in the book I talk about, we talk about love your neighbor as yourself. But I think faith plays its part in this, in making us often feel continually unworthy. And we enter a lot of conversations from that space. And we're strong because we don't want to be questioned. And we're strong because we're scared of actually the conflict. And so for me, the question that I would be asking is, how much do I love myself this Thanksgiving? And if the question is actually, do you know what? I don't have a lot of love to give someone else because I don't have a lot for myself. I think we start there. And I think that is what would make a radical change.
Mm. I love that. That was beautiful. Start with self. Do you love yourself? That's a good question. Do you? Like, that's really, do you? And then go from there. It's the pebble in the pond. Drop that first and start there, and then it can work its way out.
You're giving a conflicting narrative. Are we dropping our rocks or not, Jess? Are they?
Oh,
right.
Pebbles? That's right. Not rocks, pebble. I said a pebble. Thank you, Janelle. Just a pebble, not the rocks.
Okay.
Well, drop the rocks too. We're dropping.
Our listeners are mature enough to follow both of those tangents at the same time, I think.
They're tuned out. They're like, what is happening?
Janelle, this has been an honor. This did not disappoint. I know you were, awesome. My intro was maybe making you a little nervous, and I knew it wouldn't. So I knew that was and that exceeded my very high expectations. It is such a privilege. Your book is an asset and such a powerful contribution to the greater conversations, and it's needed. I think it was missing. And it's really helped, I think, at least for us, just plug a hole and really kind of this lattice we talk about. It almost gives, but yeah, we've been listening to the podcast for 3 years, but how do we talk about it? And I think you've given us a framework at a really timely point. And
a great resource, a really good resource to be able to offer our listeners versus just tidbits and advice along the way from all of our guests, which everyone tries to give us their theories on it. And that they've been great, but you've given us a published resource that we can go back to and review. It's really fantastic. Thank you for that.
If you ever find yourself over in North Carolina, we'd love to get lunch or tea. Is it tea?
It's tea. We have tea, but Americans, you don't actually make tea correctly. So I don't.
Okay.
That's what I've heard.
Thank you. You're good at coffee. Right.
All right. I received that.
And apologies to anyone I offended with that horrible communication.
Coffee it is. It'll be great. We would love to treat you to a cup anytime. Janelle, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, friends.